think the total is up to about 105 airplanes that I've flown. Of course, in the Air Force, I flew T-37, T-38, F-4, F-15, F-16, and got to fly a bunch of transports and bombers. The B-1, the B-52, several Navy airplanes, A-6, F-18, F-14. In the civilian world, I fly gliders and some warbirds with the Commemorative Air Force. Somebody asked me, what's my favorite airplane? And I said, well, whichever one I'm strapped to.
George Harrison was born July 30th, 1940, in Greenville, South Carolina, the second of three boys. His dad, William, was a farmer and unionized steam fitter. His mother, Mary, was a seamstress and a curtain manufacturer. At 12, he was a Boy Scout and soon after joined the Civil Air Patrol.
When I was a kid, just before high school, I got involved with Civil Air Patrol. I flew a couple of times, rides, and I got a flight scholarship, soloed a J-3 Cub on my 16th birthday, and decided I wanted to fly for a living, applied to the Air Force Academy, got in, and off I went.
While in Greenville High School, George also fell in love with Penny Maria Jenkins in what would become a long-distance and a long-lasting relationship. Graduating from the Air Force Academy in 1962, Lieutenant Harrison attended flight school and then F-4 Phantom training.
I was a first lieutenant. I was out over the Gulf of Mexico flying at Mach 2.5 at 42,000 feet. I was 2.5 times the speed of sound. Absolutely amazed at the incredible wonder of it all.
On November 28, 1963, Penny Jenkins became Penny Harrison. In addition to the F-4 Phantom, George had attended parachute school and qualified to be a forward air controller. In 1965, Lieutenant Harrison got to use those skills on a temporary duty assignment in Vietnam, guiding artillery in support of U.S. and South Vietnamese troops. Later that same year, Lieutenant Harrison, as part of the 557th Tactical Fighter Squadron in his F-4 Phantom, joined the fight in Vietnam. By the end of his one-year tour, Lieutenant Harrison had flown 260 combat missions.
The North Vietnam missions were a little more intense because you saw 37, 57, 85 millimeter, the big stuff, and of course the SA-2 missiles. We all had close encounters.
Captain Harrison returned to the States as an F-4 Phantom pilot trainer. While in Florida, George and Penny welcomed their daughter Taylor to the family. Captain Harrison received his MBA in Industrial Management from Wharton College. Now, Major Harrison was moving more into leadership roles and believed
that leadership and management are two different things. You lead people and you manage things.
In 1971, Major Harrison, as a Joint Field Training Exercise Planner, successfully coordinated 6 fighter wings and 2 Army divisions. That's about 60,000 people in associated gear and travel for a joint Army-Air Force training exercise. Son Todd joined the family in 1972 and daughter Tracy in 1973. After attending the Armed Forces Staff College, it was back to Southeast Asia. Major Harrison flew missions providing air cover as the U.S. was leaving Saigon. It was an emotional time.
We were all veterans of active combat in Vietnam. Flying over Saigon, watching the evacuation was probably the most disappointing day of my life.
While still in Thailand, the Khmer Rouge had captured an American freighter, the Mayaguez, and its crew.
So we flew over a 5-day period, missions against the place where we thought the Americans were being held. Some fairly intense opposition in terms of automatic weapons, ground fire.
Returning stateside in 1974, Major George Harrison, over the next 9 years, moved around the country in various testing, educational, and command positions. In 1984, now Colonel Harrison was at the Pentagon, where, with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he planned and oversaw the execution of contingency plans, including one significant event in Libya.
We put together a plan to retaliate against Gaddafi, executed in one night a large raid. El Dorado Canyon involved F-111s against Tripoli.
In December 1986, and for the next 3 years that followed, now Brigadier General Harrison, planned and executed all U.S. Air Force activities in Europe and Russia. In 1989, the Berlin Wall came down, and George Harrison's children got to witness history. In Germany again, from 1991 until 1992, General Harrison directed all U.S. Air Force flying and ground operations in Europe and Africa. Harrison also flew aid into Sarajevo in 1992. Major General Harrison commanded the Air Force, Army, Navy, French, and British forces enforcing post-Desert Storm sanctions against Iraq. George Harrison's last duty station before retirement was as commander of the Air Force Operational Test and Evaluation Center. There, his responsibilities included space systems, missiles, aircraft, munitions, command and control systems, and electronic warfare systems. George Harrison retired a two-star Major General in 1997 after 35 years of active duty and 4 years as an Air Force cadet. In 1997, Georgia Tech's Research Institute offered George Harrison a job in one of its labs doing research in execution and product development for electronic combat modeling and simulation. George took the job, and he and Penny moved to Atlanta, Georgia. George continued working at Tech's research lab in various positions, from being its director to the principal research engineer for the next 20 years. George has dozens of published works, both from his military and civilian careers. George has always been about giving back. While in the Air Force in Europe, he served as the district chairman for the Boy Scouts of America. As a glider pilot, he's introduced over 1,000 young people to aviation through orientation flights. As an advocate of history, he flies with the Commemorative Air Force, and as a prostate cancer survivor, he's counseled dozens of afflicted men.
My strongest supporter for the last almost 7 decades has been my wife, Penny. When I retired from the Air Force, she said, "Well, if you're not flying, you won't be happy, so let's go buy an airplane." And we did. While I was playing boy fighter pilot, wandering back and forth to Southeast Asia, she was raising our 3 kids. Taylor is an educator. Todd is an executive with Sony Corporation. Tracy is a cartographer and record album producer. We have a granddaughter, Tracy's daughter. Her name is Adela. She, from all indications, is going to be another successful contributing member of society. I hope that when people look at what I've experienced and where I've been and where I've come, they will understand that you're only limited by your willingness to work hard. Life can't be all about what's good for me. It has to be about what's good for the people around me and the people who follow on after me. That if you could focus on what you can do for other people, not just for my own personal gratification, but what I can do to make other people's lives better, both in a large national sense, but more specifically in a personal one-to-one sense. I hope that that can come through, and I hope that'll come across.
The Georgia Aviation Hall of Fame on this April 29, 2023, proudly inducts Major General George B. Harrison.